people were, when I talked to them about my project, were a little bit worried that looking at the 90s, it was the age of vandalism and maybe I was missing something. And I hope one day to code all the data, but just as a quick check to make sure that this is really what's going on, I took a random sample from each year, 25%, to just see, you know, how often it's vandalism versus arson versus other, just to see if my trends are the same, and they are the same. We see that it's almost always vandalism that's happening. Most direct action is vandalism. Some things you might be interested in. Since 1985, about 129,000 animals have been liberated. So while that's a small percent, that certainly matters to the 129,000 animals. But of course, it's only about 12%. I want to cover the pragmatic debate a little bit. The pragmatic debates are centered on the idea that someone's actually paying attention to these actions, right? They're all centered on the idea that it's bringing us really negative attention, or it's giving us a space to dialogue about these things. This is interesting to me because people who engage in underground militant direct action probably don't care about the media, right? They're probably not going for media attention. They're probably, from what I understand from writings from people who have done these things and been later caught, or who have been caught and who have talked to me, they don't engage in these actions because they want media attention. They engage in it because they feel that they have to, but somehow in the broader movement, all of us above ground activists have the idea that the media is watching, the media is paying attention, and that we should be debating about what's going on. So I wanted to test this out a little bit by looking at how media covers some of these things. So I, again, took a random 25% sample of actions that happened between 1990 and 2004. And I used a database with about 550, 600 newspapers, national and regional. And I searched for every article that was written on any of these actions. And the main thing that I found is that there's almost no coverage of any action. See, almost no coverage. This is the percent of actions that happen that actually receive coverage. So, I mean, obviously something's going on in the media that's interesting to people in a couple of these years where people are focusing on animal rights. But in a lot of years, you know, nobody's paying attention at all. Now, this isn't like PETA does a demo and it gets media coverage. That's not what I'm looking at. I'm looking at these militant, illegal, radical direct actions getting media coverage. Because it turns out PETA gets a lot of media coverage. So only about 8% of all actions in my sample were covered, and almost all of these had only one article written about them. And 66% of the time, these were in local newspapers in the area where the action happened. So these things aren't actually really getting covered very much. If we still take seriously the idea that people are covering these actions, we can then ask ourselves, well, who's getting attention when these actions are being covered? Who's being asked to speak? Are we looking at the person who was a victim of the action? Are we talking about that person as a victim? Or are we going to a social movements organization and saying, why would these people do this? And if those who have pragmatic arguments against militant direct action are right, what we would expect to see is that people are only talking to the victims of the actions or the targets of the actions. Those are the only people that are being spoken to. If the people that are who argue pragmatic arguments in support of militant direct action, then what we would expect to see is that social movement actors get to speak. People who work for social movement organizations will get asked questions, right? And people with pragmatic arguments for militant direct action don't care who else is asked. They just care that their cause gets heard, right? It turns out that almost all the time, this blue right here, both of them are consulted, right? 20% of the time, it's just a report of what happened. It's just, you know, I don't know if you guys read local papers, but they have that one sheet, like what's going on around the state, and they name a town and one sentence on it. That's those 20%. And then only a small fraction of the time do you only talk to an animal rights organization or only talk to the target of it. A small percentage of the time when they talk to animal rights organizations, they talk to animal rights organizations to actually speak out against the militant direct action, but that's only a small percentage of the time. So overall, these results indicate that there is validity to the claim that militant direct action opens a space to discuss animal rights concerns. But it also supports the idea that militant direct action brings negative attention to the animal rights movement. So though it's not often, 11% of the time when someone from the animal rights side is consulted, they disavow or otherwise speak out against the militant direct action, as I just mentioned. And occasionally, about 20% of the time in these articles, the word terrorist comes up. So animal rights activists are referred to as terrorists, and this is before 9/11. So I imagine that it's picked up since then. So for me, it's not clear what it means as a sociologist. As a sociologist, I'm not sure, is there a positive radical flank effect? Is there a negative radical flank effect? It seems to me like both things are happening, right? It's only clear to me that there's a very heated debate rooted largely in misinformation in the animal rights movement. So we have people within the movement debating very strongly against each other, and the things that they're debating about don't actually seem to be happening at all. So as an academic, this is where I usually stop. As an academic, I say, here's some claims, here's some facts. I think everyone's a little bit right and everybody's a little bit wrong, and maybe the movement should think about that. But this is a special kind of conference where I get to be an activist. So as a sociologist, the jury's still out. I have to do a lot more research. Radical flank effect, positive or negative, I'm not sure. But as an activist, I definitely have some opinions that I'm going to go into. This is a great picture, right? The bird animal. So as an activist, I just don't think it's ever appropriate to demonize militant direct action. Nothing is working. Every year, we spent a long time last night hanging out at my house trying to figure out how many billions of animals are murdered every year. You know why I can't figure it out? Because like 90% of the animals that are murdered in scientific testing aren't even counted in any of the facts and figures. No fish are counted in facts and figures about food animals. So we came up with a number about 50 billion every year, but you know, that's excluding so many animals. So I'm sure it's 100 billion or 200 billion. That's just in the United States. And we have billions and billions and billions of animals dying, and how many animals were rescued? 129,000 animals. Now, I don't make the choice to go do that, but I sure as hell am not going to demonize someone who feels that that's the only way to make change. I think that these debates that we're having, they're strong debates. People are arguing with each other, and I think that they are good debates to have. It's good to have theoretical and philosophical understandings of what's going on, but they're not good debates to divide ourselves over. As we can see, a lot of these things just aren't really rooted in facts and what's actually going on. If someone wants to call our movement a terrorist movement, they're going to call it a terrorist movement. As we saw, almost none of the actions that happened were very scary. There's always going to be one exemplar action that someone who doesn't agree with us can use. It's always going to be there. So I think we need to stop focusing on demonizing each other. I think it's great in academic realm to have people having these discussions, but there's a lot of divisions in the animal rights movement right now over these discussions. There are people refusing to work together over these discussions, and that's absolutely pointless. We are small, what, half of 1%? We need to work together. We need to not fight each other. Yeah, Teddy. That's the best support I could have hoped for.